Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. My name is Jason.
And my name is Steve.
And what we do here is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. And for today's topic, we are going to be talking about porn. Specifically, is porn an intelligent way to manage your sexuality? And I'd like to get into some topics like, is porn helpful? Is it harmful? How it impacts relationships, and kind of just take a deep dive into that.
Into porn.
Into porn.
Oh my God. Okay. So, I feel shy again. And that happens a lot when you, when I listen to you introduce a topic, because I don't want to come across as a scold or a know-it-all. And because of human diversity, there's so many possible answers, right? Mm-hmm. So for some people, porn is going to be a wonderfully recreational part of their bedroom activities, and the couple are perfectly comfortable with what they're doing. For other people, and I'm thinking of people who I've met in my office over the years, porn brings up all kinds of body images for him or her, and they feel very uncomfortable with their partner's interest in porn. But then they discover hentai or animated porn, and well, that's different. And so they can consume sexually explicit pornography that's, as long as it's in an animated format, then they're comfortable. There's still other people who find all of it very distasteful and uncomfortable. And so I don't think there is a one answer that fits all, but I'd like to, if we can, like we always do, talk about things, and then invite the listeners to just, consider this from a variety of different angles, because it isn't just one thing. And I'll just, at the top of the hour, I'll just challenge everybody listening to think, what if you met the perfect person for you, perfect in every way, and they had, as you got to know them, you had an amazing sex life and everything was working out great, and then you find out that they have exactly the opposite attitude toward porn that you have? Is that a deal breaker? Because there are wonderful people who think differently from us, and whether it's porn or any other subject, I suppose. And with pornography, there's some people who integrate it into a perfectly normal life, and it's perfectly comfortable for them. And of course, I've had many clients over the years who look at pornography somewhat compulsively. And for them, it's not a part of a wonderful life. It's a part of their loneliness and their isolation. And so there's a lot of ways of looking at this. And I just want to make that disclosure at the onset of our conversation, because I don't really have a hard doctrinaire stand on this like I do about online dating.
Yeah.
I'm very against online dating. It's the devil. But with pornography, and by pornography, are we free to include erotica, like erotic literature?
For like 50 Shades of Grey and books like that?
Yeah. Would that also be?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not pictorial depictions of attractive people posed in sexually alluring positions, which is how I describe it in court.
Yeah. I guess we would have to just think of, what is porn? Is it entering into a fantasy realm for the man and the woman?
Well, because then the definition keeps expanding if we do that. And I kind of do think that that's a reasonable way to do it, because I think that also then includes women's romance novels.
Yeah, if that's the case, then yeah, because they're imagining they're the woman in there, right?
Well, I presume not too many of them could pass for Fabio, but I think for a lot of women, it's for them it's an integrated situation where they have sexuality and romance, they have titillation and intimacy rolled into their fantasy, but it's still a sexual fantasy. It doesn't stop being a sexual fantasy. So I'm aware, as you're listening to this, wherever you are, that there's going to be pornography that is explicit, XXX kind of stuff that would be controlled by certain government actors for the benefit of all the rest of us and to keep young people pure. And then there's other erotica that I suppose most people can buy at their local bookstore or online, and certainly from online distributors like, big house distributors like Amazon. Mm-hmm. And then there's the pornography of the mind that includes romance, and I think that would have to include romance novels and certain Hallmark Channel movies.
Even those?
Well, because they are sexual fantasies, mm-hmm. right? And some of us are comfortable with more explicit material, some less explicit, and some want our romances to be kind of like, what's her name, who wrote the trilogy about the vampires?
Stephanie Meyer.
Yeah.
Twilight.
And her work is referred to as abstinence porn because they get close enough to kiss, maybe, but that's it, in most of her work. And so, it's meant to kind of glorify that sexual tension where there's all that feeling and impact, but none of the actual exchange of body fluids, unless it's, blood.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we could incorporate all of that into it. I would say that's fair.
It's weird because if for those who are nerdy enough to remember the Venus of Willendorf statue, there's it was a short, 6-inch statue. I don't think it was more than that. But it's made of clay, and it's an exaggerated female form with exaggerated hips and breasts and an exaggerated vulva. And a female anthropologist, archaeologist, she came out with a new theory that was porn, and that her conclusions were based on the findings that there were certain areas where she could find hundreds, or there had been found hundreds of such forms, and it was like a little porn shop, where they had just manufactured so many of these, and it was considered normal in her mind for adolescents perhaps to masturbate with these images held in their hands. And I think, that's a possibility. So maybe even the Venus of Willendorf was pornographic at some point.
I feel like everything's going to be porn by the time we're done with this podcast.
Well, yeah, I think that would be interesting. And then, of course, there are those hypersensitive people who consider really anything that discusses human sexuality in a frank manner as pornography, particularly just a normal discussion of teenagers and their sexual thoughts and feelings. If they're gay, they're wanting those books, torn out of school libraries. So banning books, it helps when you call them pornography. It helps when, in your argument, if you're saying, well, these are groomers' textbooks. This is how, children get molested, is by having books like this around. And I don't think we want to go quite that far, because that would be, at some point then we have to throw in the Bible for the stories of rape and incest, of course.
And so are you comfortable talking about your own experiences with porn? Are
you comfortable talking about?
I will, yeah. Yours or mine or what?
Well, yeah. It sounded like you were uncomfortable asking the question. So my experiences with porn are pretty darn limited in that, it was mostly, through my adolescence, and then in my young 20s, even when married, I had some exposure to porn.
Were you Playboys? Did you have magazines?
Mostly like Playboys, that kind of thing.
Were you?
I had a subscription to Playboy when I was like 16 or something like that. And it would be delivered to my house. And I thought it was very sophisticated and cool for having that.
Did your mom know that you had it?
No. I would.
How did it come to your house then? You had to go there?
No, it would get mailed to my house. I would get home before she got off work.
Okay. So you have to have, that's what I was trying to figure out your system.
But
that's a bold move.
Yeah. Well, again, I was very sophisticated. Yeah. But
were you like smoking a pipe when you were?
Well, yeah, I was thinking more something like a cigarette holder. Wouldn't that have been cool? But held in the European style with the thumb and the forefinger. No, I think it's not. I want to normalize something for everybody here. If you're feeling shame because of your prior experience, or you're feeling anger with your teenagers, there's nothing weird about a young person having curiosity about the anatomy of the opposite sex. And there's nothing odd about children of any age being attracted to beautiful depictions of attractive sexual objects, like men and women who are just really good looking and posed in alluring positions with great lighting and all the right body types, the secondary sexual indicators. That's not weird. There's no part of the brain that resists enjoying that kind of thing. Religion does help. When you introduce religion and we start shaming people for even having the curiosity or the threats of going to hell, that would help scare people. But it's not particularly weird to be interested. It's perfectly natural and normal. I think for me, even as a young person, I thought it was normal to look at that. And because of that, I quickly got bored. And I say quickly because I really didn't consume all that much porn. I didn't look at it that much. And this is all pre-internet, so there wasn't a whole lot of porn in comparison to what's available today. But even then, though, there were movies in different formats. And I just found the complete absence of a plot to be boring. I mean, a woman who raises her eyebrow and says, wow, do they always send 3 plumbers to a little job like this? That's not really what I would think of as great writing, and the production values are really awful. There's really no story to follow. And sex is always if you've ever watched an oil derrick, with the pumping motion, pumping the oil out of the ground, it's a lot like watching a porn because it's repetitious. It's the same thing over and over and over. And once you've seen that a few times, I mean, yeah, at first it's sexually arousing, but after a while it's just, been there, done that. And so it's not that interesting.
But some people get hooked on it and they're making it be, like we talked about, like you were just talking a few minutes ago, a deal breaker, possibly like, oh, you're not going to let me watch porn? Yeah, not for me.
Yeah, right. Well, some people get hooked on Oreos too.
Yeah.
And
there's so many other cookies out there.
But that doesn't make them evil, and it doesn't make the Oreos evil or the person who compulsively eats Oreos. There's nothing wrong with fried food occasionally, but people who eat so much fried food that they get obese, the obesity is a problem. But even before the obesity, I would think having an insatiable hunger where you just need to keep feeding that's indicative of some kind of early childhood trauma and a compulsive self-soothing behavior. So again, being able to tell the difference. So I don't think moms and dads out there who come home and find their 13-year-old riveted by the attention of to a pornographic production, I don't think that's so much to be concerned about. But I do think it's concerning when over time one notices that, oh, my child doesn't date, he doesn't make friends, he's isolated, and oh, now he's 25 and he's never asked a girl out. That's really too late, right? I mean, for the parent to even be noticing it and making a difference. But I And I'm not saying, and every parent out there should let their children bring their pornography home and have unrestricted access to porn. Because I don't think that
it's time for your porn time. Go in the room and do your thing for an hour.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to be helpful either. So, and I think parents have the right to say, I can appreciate your curiosity, but I just don't want that stuff in our home. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's okay for parents to have that kind of boundary. Mm-hmm. But life finds a way, as they said in Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. And so kids are going to be looking at porn, and it's one of the predominant search terms for young children, even way under 12. So way before puberty. And part of that is the fact that we as a society, but parents in particular, don't handle human sexuality in a matter-of-fact way. Mm-hmm. So kids are curious, and they want to satisfy their curiosity by looking, what's the big deal? What's everybody talking about? Mm-hmm. What is doggy style anyway? And or the hound's way, as one comedian put it the other day. What does that mean? And I don't think there's anything wrong with children finding out what these words mean, and they will ask if they know that they can come to their parents, if they know that they're totally allowed to read books, if they can satisfy their curiosity in these healthy ways that we've, I think, curated for them. It's so much safer than leaving them on their own because we're uncomfortable, because then they are going to go to the internet, or worse yet, to unsavory older people who might very likely be willing to exploit them because they don't love them the way parents love their children.
Yeah. And how about like the access to it for children now? Like, say, before you had to get a prescription or get a subscription, make sure your mom wasn't going to be home, grab it before she comes home. And now someone could just hop online, type something in the Google search engine, and they have endless amounts of porn available to them.
Well, even if a teenager does do something like that, a parent has to ask himself, how much of a big deal do I want to make this? Because if you become aware of your teen's search history, is that the hill you want to die on, as in terms of your parental authority? My concern would be if it's repressed, that which is repressed will be expressed inappropriately. So I'm going to ban this looking at pornography even for my 16-year-old. I'm going to make sure that he's shamed and made to feel uncomfortable and all of that. And now I've succeeded in making it ever more titillating, because now it's forbidden, and there's nothing more exciting than that which is forbidden. So what we really would ideally want, I think, is a recognition of the power of titillation. I think the ideal parent would want their child to have a growth, a journey into adult sexuality where they're very aware of the near hypnotic appeal of titillation, while at the same time realizing, it's not all that just by itself. It's really like watching an oil derrick endlessly. And I mean, it's just not that exciting. So what's really much more interesting is the journey toward intimacy. Because as listeners will recall, the perfect sex life, what's it made of? Two things.
It's titillation and intimacy.
Right.
And intimacy is the ability to safely share your life with another human.
Right. And so intellectual intimacy is sharing ideas safely with one another. Sexual intimacy, sharing my sexuality with someone. And sexual intimacy doesn't have to be limited to two sexual partners. It could be something that is shared in a men's group where people, or a women's group where people are feeling safe talking about their sexual experiences. There can be a great deal of sexual intimacy in those conversations. So just doing it isn't sexual intimacy. It can include sexual intimacy, or it can disinclude sexual intimacy. Depends on the circumstance.
Yeah. And also with those parents too, so say you go through your child's history and you're like, oh my God, he's been busy. And or she's been checking out all these romance books, but they do have a social life. They do have friends, it's almost like more of a normal part of human development, it sounds like.
I would say it is a normal part of human development in that teens have a hormonal level that's primed the pump for a lot of sexual activity, and we want them to take care of themselves intelligently rather than having sex with a variety of partners or unprotected sex. Or, I mean, really what we want to get, I think, is getting them to a point where they're actually finding pornography somewhat boring. Or if nothing else, maybe finding pornography, experiencing pornography perhaps as an astute observer of the genre, and being very discriminating in their taste. Because if it's just about watching more oil derrick activity, that should be boring at a certain point.
Yeah.
It's going to be real interesting when you're 12, 13 years old. But by the time your children have grown up and they're ready to launch as young adults and go off to college, that kind of pornography, I'm thinking they should be kind of over that. It's a little bit like just downing that whole box of Oreos. I think it's, there's a time to get over that.
So, but what is it that so many people get stuck on it, get use it as a way while they're in relationships? So say I'm like a kid, and it started with me. My friend was going through a dumpster in Kmart, and me and my friend were riding our bikes, and he threw him at, and my other friend, so it's me and my one friend hanging out. My other friend, who I knew of, was meanwhile searching in a dumpster, found a bunch of porns outside of Kmart, and then when he drove past us on his bike, he threw it out like a paper newsboy or something. And we were like in 5th grade, and we got it, and we took it to the woods. Of course, yeah. That's where you take them.
That's where the wild things are.
Yeah. And we perused the magazine, and then kept it back there in like a little hiding spot.
And then we'd go visit it.
And then we go to
yeah. And that's really kind of typical young child behavior with something that's forbidden, right? So the original question was, what is it about pornography
So that then led to, and I grew up with the age of the internet. Like I grew up in 84. That's when I was born. So then in the 90s, when I was around that age, dial-up internet became a thing. AOL chat became a thing. Send pics became a thing. And then from there, it became high-speed internet, go off to college, go download porn, and then you could watch it there. Then it's like progressed to kind of like where we are now, where it's like you get it at your fingertips. So, and that whole trajectory for me, unfortunately, and kind of embarrassingly to say, but, being honest, I didn't finally stop doing it until I was like 37. So like for 2 years, I've been pretty much off of it. And, but I wasn't like doing it addictively, I guess. Like I wasn't like doing it every day. I was still in relationships and stuff like that, but I would still like rely on it for some sort of titillating aspect. But again, I think it, like you said, there was something probably in my childhood that I haven't worked out, or something that I wasn't being satisfied in my own relationship.
Yeah, some level of repression of your very normal male sexuality. And even now, at your current age, now that everybody in America knows that you were born in 84, I think, or even at my age, if I felt like looking at pornography, I would go look at pornography. If I heard about a new website that was really odd and my client was, for example, looking at it, I'd go look at it and see what was that all about? Because I want to know what's going on in the lives of my clients. And sometimes it's just simple curiosity. I'm curious about what's going on with that website, or what it is, the product that they're offering. And I think that it's intriguing for a variety of different reasons, but I think shaming oneself or feeling guilty or bad about who you are for having taken a look recently, I just think that would be unhelpful. In fact, I would just say, yeah, I was curious, or I hadn't seen any in a long time, wanted to see what's up lately, or I was feeling sexually frustrated and I looked at some porn to help me get some sexual gratification. And I just don't think there's anything weird or odd about that. I think it's pretty darn normal. The people who, and I'm going to say this to people listening, the people who are most against looking at porn are not only the most repressed, but they're the most likely suspects for people who are compulsively drawn to porn. So I would be very suspicious of anybody out there who's trying to police adult access to pornography, and preaching against it and holding rallies against it and organizing book burnings and all the rest. That whole line of thinking, to me, speaks of a preoccupation with human sexuality that's rather unhealthy. And I'm a guy who thinks about human sexuality professionally, and I think about it a lot. But that level of thinking, where you're working so hard to repress other people in their sexuality, that's what's really weird and scary about all of that. And it speaks to their own level of, early childhood trauma and the problems that they've had working through their sexuality. So even today, as old as you are, or as old as anybody listening to this is, I just don't think there's anything weird about occasionally looking at porn if that's what you want to do. The thing that holds me back is it's just so painfully boring. The canned lines, even when I see pornography portrayed like in a movie where an alluring, beautiful woman is looking into a camera and saying the pornographic lines, they're very hackneyed lines that have been repeated a million times over.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I'm watching something that's really making me stupider by the second. So I don't, but if I could be in a future world, let's say, where you could put on a 3D apparatus over your eyes, and you were able to immerse yourself in a world that was virtual, and that in that world you had sexual relations somehow, and I don't know how they would, mimic those sensations, but I'm sure somebody's working on it right now, even as we speak. I'm thinking, would I do something like that? Oh, absolutely. I probably love to try that on, just to see how that all works and how it feels. And, and if it was really good, what would we do? If it was a really good experience. And I think for me, again, it's a little bit like going to counseling, isn't it? If I had a box out of which a voice like my own was speaking to my clients, would my clients feel comfortable talking to the box? Most of them, I've already asked them, they've said, no, I wouldn't. But what if it was a robot who looked exactly like me, but you knew he was a robot?
Yeah.
Would that be satisfying? And my clients generally say no, whether they're male or female. They say no because there's some magic that happens knowing that I'm connecting with another human being, and that another human being is actually accepting me. And that's why I think the fears of, heterosexual men in America, once all those robots are perfected, or that virtual world apparatus is perfected, that'll be the end of our species in this country. I don't think so. Because it's again like another thought experiment. What if I live in Nevada and we have legalized prostitution in this state, and not everywhere, so don't get trigger happy on buying a trip to Nevada, but in brothels it's legal. And I've asked my clients, well, would you like to have one-night stands or meaningless sex with women? And many of my male clients would say, yes, absolutely. And I say, and would it be sustainable? What do you mean? Well, if I lent you my platinum card from the local brothel, and it allowed you to have unlimited sex with as many women in the brothel as possible, and you could keep it for years, would that be a satisfying, sustainable sex life? And not one guy has ever said, yeah, that would work for me.
Yeah.
And the reason it doesn't work is because we've evolved to long for the real. We want the real. And the challenge would be then saying, okay, I've got these ideas from porn, and I'd like to replicate them in my sex life with my girlfriend or my wife. or with, in her case, with my husband or my boyfriend. And there's room for some of that. Sure, absolutely. There's room for some inspiration or some good ideas. But it is also true that there's an ongoing conversation across America about how unrealistic the sex education of pornography has been or how unrealistic the education it has provided to young people. Because in pornography, everybody has these idealized shapes. Everybody is totally willing to do everything. And everybody can be bent or twisted into whatever positions seem to be humanly possible. And that's not real. So when we talk about the real, I'm of an age that's nearly as old as the earth itself. And I still have a great sex life. And I know in the back of my mind that my wife has aged imperceptibly day by day, but that she's aged the 30 years we've been together. So there's some real aging in 30 years. But what keeps it real and truly satiating, I think, is the connection, the very real connection. So for a wife who finds her husband's looking at porn, or a husband who finds his wife looking at porn, I think the question would be, oh, so what do you like about this? Tell me all about it.
Yeah.
And then, whether, the object of the pornography is of a different race, or the object, the actors, if you can use the word actors without being too insulting to real actors, if the people having sex in the pornography are of a different stature physically, bigger, smaller, skinnier, fatter, if they do different things, I would want to know all of that.
Yeah.
So if, and does that mean that's what you're really looking for? And to try to explore that with an open mind, because it's really, there's no such thing as bad information. It may be somewhat painful to find out that your mate doesn't like men of your race, or your mate doesn't like people of your stature or whatever it is, that there's something missing from their sex life. But generally what that means is there's something far more elemental that's missing. And it's not just titillation. Men and women who get stuck on the titillation train are distracted by that bright, shiny ball of, bigger penises, bigger boobs, ever more weird positions or circumstances for having sex. Oh, in a church? Oh my goodness. That kind of stuff. But again, it's not intimacy. And that is the real challenge that makes sex or a sex life with an individual sustaining or sustainable, because it's real. As opposed to, let's reenact this scene that we saw in pornography. Oh, that was very exciting. But I assure you, dear listener, after you have reenacted every sex position in every room of your house, and then even challenge yourself to use the front yard and the backyard in the dark, of course, hoping that your neighbors don't have the right kind of binoculars to see that. If whatever it is you're doing, you get to an end. There's an end to all the titillation. And at that point, then you got to do ever weirder stuff. Yeah. Whereas with intimacy, when you're in pursuit of intimacy and your partner is as well, the conversations become incredibly stimulating. The moment of simply being together and looking in one another's eyes, or doing virtually anything that feels safe, is extremely satisfying. So it's a very, for those men and women out there whose partners are stuck on titillation, you might want to have that conversation and see if they're interested in a life that would be more intimacy centered. Not that you're going to let go of the titillation, but believe me, the intimacy is going to make it really great. And if they're not interested, then I think really it's time to maybe admit to yourself that your partner is really not in love with you, because they really don't want to get to know you better. And I think it's also true, if you're looking in the mirror and you go back over your history and you realize and can accept the idea that maybe I've never had an intimate sexual connection with another person, it's going to take some conversation, not some intercourse to get there. It's going to take some conversation to get there.
Yeah.
And it's going to be challenging to start dating maybe different class of people. And by class, of course, I don't mean one socioeconomic group necessarily, but a class of people who are genuinely interested in genuinely connecting. So pornography can be fun, and I think it can inspire some fun ideas, but it's by itself, it's sort of a wah kind of experience because we grow tired of it.
Yeah. But what about,
it's like Diet Pepsi.
So are the people who don't grow tired of it, are they unable to be intimate, or they have some blockage where they can't even go there, or that they don't want to go there, or?
Well, okay, so the people who never grow tired of it, they are growing tired of it, whether they admit it or not, because they keep looking for ever more risque, ever more hardcore pornographic experiences.
Well, I remember I had a friend, and he was like hardcore at like 18, 19. Like,
right.
You go to the flea market in South Chicago and you buy, 5 videos for $20 or whatever it was.
Paid way too much.
And all of his, were the most extreme stuff you could get. And I remember he was even saying, he's like wearing that out. Like it was like going, kind of gone. And it's like and then he would make fun of me. He's like, oh, you just watch more normal porn and like G-rated porn, and I wasn't like at his level or whatever. Like he was, and it was really messed up in a way. I'm not friends with him anymore, but anyways,
no one is.
No, yes.
No one's friends with him anymore.
I know, it's true,
right?
Well, he has a girlfriend still.
Well, but, I can believe that. So, I mean, your question as you originally posed it, I don't know if you can remember how you said it, but I think, what about those people who are still clinging to porn and enjoying porn? They can't let go of it.
Something like that.
Yeah. And so I'm going to share a startling truth. I hope everybody's sitting down, but some people are just not that bright. There are some really thoughtless people out there for whom thinking is just not an interesting activity. So even if they overheard this conversation and they even understood, let's say, what intimacy was, they would just mentally be throwing it like a used beer can over their shoulder as they marched forward in their lives, because it's just not interesting to them. There's a whole group of people in our society and around the world who are not interested in intimacy, nor can they actually do it. They're mentally incapable of doing it. And that's okay. I don't judge them. In fact, I do not shake my head and even wag my finger at those people who are capable of intimacy, who keep trying to have relationships with people who are not capable of intimacy. Those, it's I understand why the guy who's incapable of it behaves the way he does.
Yeah.
But the rest of us who are trying to have relationships with those people, that's what's really confusing. Because, and I think, but I think the key there is, I think a lot of us who are capable of intimacy, we keep seeing human-shaped objects and we presume that the inside is just like our inside, that we're capable of intimacy, so he or she must be capable of intimacy. And it's unthinkable for those of us who are capable of intimacy. It's almost like unthinkable, because that means they're not capable of love. And that means they're really not human. And that means all those science fiction movies of alien invaders who run, oh my God, it's all true. The nightmare is true. And it's really very freaky. It's really very weird. I remember, there was a porn star who recently died at a sadly young age in her 40s, and I was reading I think it was a New York Times obituary about her, and she was a beautiful, very attractive woman, and she she said she had a lot of fun in her career. She had sex, a lot of great sex, she said, with great people, and really enjoyed herself. Mm-hmm. Well, after 20 years of having great sex with great people on camera, I'm thinking, yeah, it never got repetitious for you. It was always new and refreshing. I find that really absolutely unbelievable with a normal brain. So if she did, and here I am speaking ill of the dead, if she did find that endlessly fun and interesting, I think there was something missing upstairs.
But could she have been just like thinking of herself like an athlete kind of, or like like
farther, stronger, more? Yeah.
But if you're doing it as like a profession, maybe there's a shift there. I think normal people, maybe there could be a shift with them if they're thinking of it in a different way that way. But then if it's a normal everyday person, I don't know if you could. I think for the normal everyday person, I would say yes, but I would think they're doing something with their mind.
If it's my job, okay, so and it's very repetitious, so it's being like at a Ford assembly plant in 1930.
Yeah. And you got to make it fun somehow.
Right.
You got to like...
You're telling jokes, or you're doing something to make it fun, squirting people with champagne, after shaking it up, or I don't know what you're doing to make it fun, but it's not that interesting by itself.
Yeah.
Now, I have to admit, I have a rather, I have a son who has ADHD. I have lots of clients who have ADHD, and their kryptonite is boredom. So they are capable, once they find what they like doing, they are capable of doing that and enjoying themselves, and can remain focused and not get scattered in their thinking. They can work and work and work. They're not lazy at all once they find what they have passion for. So maybe some of these people are finding pornography to be the art form they want to take to the highest possible level, and they're making it an amazing experience. But for me, and I have a near infinite capacity for doing boring things, it's just so utterly boring to think of myself working on an assembly line, doing the same repetitive motion over and over and over.
Yeah.
Now, I would do that to support my family. Like millions of American workers have done that. And I did work in a factory for a year while I was going to college, and I didn't have a problem with showing up for work and doing the work and all of that, but it's not something I aspire to.
Yeah.
And if I looked back over a career, in that particular factory, we were manufacturing garden hoses and packing them up for shipment across the world. And the idea that I'd spend 20, 30 years of my life doing that would just make me want to break down and cry. I mean, that's kind of a meaningless existence. That's why we invent robots, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they can do stuff like that. And maybe someday the robots will be having the sex. In pornography, and that will be amazing, because they'll be able to, imitate Gumby and Pokey the horse and do all kinds of weird things that we can't even imagine yet. But I do think there's a little bit of a problem in that it'd be boring. And there's an amateur genre of porn.
Yeah.
And people can go down to a studio or film themselves in their own home or a motel room and post that on the internet. And on a lot of sites, they allow that and that kind of content. And I think that might be fun in the sense of, oh, look at us, we're exhibitionists, or, oh, what an adventure. And I've never done this with anybody. But for doing it for like every week for years, that just sounds not fun. Can't we just go to a movie?
And then, so moving on with that too. And there's also, but the people who cannot give it up, I mean, specifically maybe some guys, there is kind of a cautionary tale. Like it sounds like everything you're saying, it's up to the person. If they want to do it, they could do it. This is my thoughts on it. You're not saying somebody's good or bad, or not putting any of those labels on it.
But there's a mental health challenge there, right?
Yeah.
The mental health challenge is this. these individuals have some sort of early childhood trauma, and they never got the help that they needed. And now they have a compulsive self-soothing behavior. And we see it clearly when it's booze or when it's drugs. We see it clearly when it's overeating. I mean, it's obvious he's obese. We see it clearly when he's gambled away the family's fortune, in a local casino. But we don't see it in the secretive world of, somebody masturbating in the privacy of their own domicile. But it's exactly the same kind of behavior. And I don't think that there's such a thing as a porn addiction. I don't think that people become porn addicts. But I do see it as an indicator of significant suffering that has been left unaddressed. And for the person for whom that answer still works, they may not have any interest in getting help, but because not everybody who overeats becomes interested in getting some therapy for that. But the problem isn't the overeating.
Yeah.
The problem is the trauma that led to the need for all that self-soothing that became over time compulsive because they never got help. For me, the pornography, so this is the mistake of sex addiction thinking. The mistake there is thinking the pornography is the problem and we need to eliminate the pornography and come up with some kind of definition of sexual sobriety, when in fact the problem that I would say they can go ahead and look at porn and masturbate as long as they want to, but if they're going to get help, to go get the help, and what they'll find over time, if the help is significant, is they'll lose the interest. It'll just become boring because it's in the end meaningless and repetitive.
Well, yeah. I mean, in my own journey with it all, I guess, that's kind of what it came for me. I feel like the more mentally healthy I became, the less interesting it became as well.
Right. Now, but if we do another thought experiment with you or anybody else listening to this, you as a guy right now, you're not particularly interested in porn, but you're not rabidly against it either. And if you met a woman who had a porn video that she just really cherished for some personal meaning, that it had in her life, it set her free and free from whatever it was that was holding her back in life, or she had a collection of, say, hentai porn that was animated porn, and she thought it'd be fun for the two of you to watch it, I'm guessing you would watch it.
No, I'm joking. Yes, of course.
Of
I'd be
course.
like, pop it in. Let's and
go.
I would ask her those questions, like you were saying, like, what about it do you like, and what get the story behind it. But,
and what about this particular storyline is exciting to you? And it's usually something forbidden, and but it's no more forbidden than my own fascination with most of the thrillers or murder mysteries that I read. It's no more forbidden than any other kind of literature or theater out there. It's just sexual in nature.
Yeah, and you're intaking it visually rather than mentally, I guess.
Right, unless it's erotica that you're reading.
Yeah,
in which case, but I've never viewed 50 Shades of Grey, and I've never read the book. But I guess mostly because that's what I do for a living. So it just feels too much like going to work at the office.
Yeah.
But if my wife came home one day and said, "Oh, I won this DVD at a bridal shower or something," at the gift exchange or whatever, I would say, "Okay, and do you know what it's about?" And if she said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I really want to watch this with you," sure, I'd watch that. Yeah. And would it destroy our marriage by planting a seed of pornography? I don't think so. I think it would be nowhere near as intriguing as my own life with my wife is, my own conversations.
There is a sort of cautionary tale with porn as well that we haven't got into, like you working with people who've committed sex crimes that sometimes can lead to a sex crime from watching one porn and then needing more stimulation, and you're following that titillation train to the point where you go into kind of underage territory.
Right. Now you're going to be convicted of possession of child porn.
But that's also something like probably the most that thing that is kind of dangerous about it, I would say.
Oh, it's horribly dangerous in terms of wrecking somebody's life, at least short term. I don't think it deserves the stigma that it gets. And I don't think, just where we make everybody register as a sex offender, regardless of whether it was urinating in public or it was downloading child porn or it was rape of a real living human being. I think it's rather odd that we, require everybody to register on it and has no proven success in preventing sexual crime. So that's all crazy. But among my clients who like porn, when I posit the question hypothetically, but would you give that up if you had somebody who really loved you and was willing to have great sex with you? Well, yeah. I mean, that's really universal in general.
Okay.
The one exception would be your friend in Chicago, your former friend.
Well, I have a few friends that are still like watching it and like,
have girlfriends.
And have girlfriends or,
And as you think about them, I mean, they're friends. I don't know if they're close friends or mere acquaintances, but, I would want to ask their girlfriend or significant other if they have a truly intimate relationship. I suspect not so much.
Yes, I think you're right. And going back and seeing, I don't know, it's kind of tough. Like you go back and see your friends and they do struggle in their relationships or they struggle with alcohol or, I mean, especially alcohol out there because it's so ingrained. So it's like, or they're in relationships with people who aren't the best and the matches aren't great or the communication's messed up, especially from working with you, learning all these things and then not being able to unsee it all. And now it's like you almost have another sense and you're able to see all of these things and it's not that difficult of a thing to understand. Titillation and intimacy make the great relationship, but understanding that and then understanding a lot of the other stuff that we talk about.
Well, the hard thing, and I kind of thought, now I'm thinking we should have put a disclaimer at the very beginning of episode 1. Maybe we should do it regularly. The weird thing about getting emotionally healthy about human sexuality and learning to manage sexuality intelligently is you come to realize, oh, nobody's doing this.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm the only person I know who's doing this. And the only other people I know of doing that are a bunch of people who've been convicted of sex crimes who go to Stephen Ing's group. and there's a lot of truth to that because how could we manage our sexuality intelligently when we never talk about it this way with other people?
Well, I don't even know if they want to hear it too.
Right.
It's like they want to stay, for some reason, relationships, sex, and love. People think they got to figure it out.
Yeah. I'm not, because you can stick tab A into slot B and then eventually you'll have an orgasm. And so I've got that figured out, right? No, you really don't have that figured out. That whole notion of what is intimacy, and even knowing the definition doesn't get you there because intimacy has skills associated with it. Just the skill of, the woman coming in to see her husband surprisingly looking at porn and he hurriedly shuts the laptop computer and he says, "What's up, honey?" And she said, "What were you looking at?" And they get into that whole conversation. And for many American women, that's when they feel deputized to become part of the sex police. And now they've got to lecture him and they've got to tell, "I just don't feel right about this. You've got to stop doing this. I'm not going to stay with you if you keep doing this," which is doing everything you can to make sure you don't develop intimacy.
Yeah.
Which is also being done on his part by keeping secret after secret after secret and never learning how to let another person into your life. So, even on a date, I think it would be reasonable for two people who are considering moving in together or an exclusive commitment to say, "What are your thoughts on pornography?" Or, "I'm curious, what has your experience been with pornography over your young and beautiful life?" To be able to talk about that. And I think for a lot of women in particular, I'm sorry to say that they're the ones burdened with this, if they had known that their boyfriend was that into porn, they would have probably steered away from the beginning rather than getting systematically desensitized, because we do get desensitized to virtually anything, right? That's one of the strengths and weaknesses of our species is we can adapt to virtually anything, including a spouse who starts drinking, and the drinking increases and increases and increases until, wow, everybody can see they have a drinking problem. But for the person who's grown used to it over the years, it's just life.
Yeah.
This is just the way things are. I wish he didn't, or I wish she didn't drink that way, but we have a dangerous capacity for getting used to things we have no business getting used to. And I would say the person who's compulsive about anything is something we should not be getting used to, because that person doesn't need a spouse. They need a therapist.
Yeah.
They really do. And I say that with love and kindness in my heart. They just don't need a spouse right now. They may wish to have a regular sex partner, and I can certainly understand that, but they really need help. Yeah. And if they don't know that they need help, well, that means they need the help all the more, because they still don't see anything. Yeah. And unfortunately, you have to, in my experience, you really can't force feed that. You can just say, yeah, this isn't going to work for me because you don't really provide intimacy. You're really kind of all about titillation.
Yeah.
And I get that, and I can respect that you have your own journey, but that's not going to work for me. Well, I can change, and the guy who promises to never look at porn, that's not really what any of us are looking for.
Yeah.
What we would all be more satisfied with is with the guy who doesn't need to look at porn, and who doesn't look at porn as a regular go-to whenever he's feeling bored or uncomfortable. And that guy on the opposite side, or the flip side of that coin, is able to engage in intimacy. I think that would be what I would be looking for. So, but I'd say the same thing about the drug addict or the alcoholic. I'd say the same thing about the person who's got the problem with obesity and not just obesity, but compulsive overeating, because of course we want to include the people who are bulimic.
Yeah. Well, I think the key term is the compulsive self-soothing behavior.
Yes.
That seems to be the key term that is sticking out in my head. And that then, as you said, stems from something in childhood. And I think a lot of this stuff, even listening to these conversations, I think for the listener, it's like you have to be willing to really look at yourself in a way that maybe you're not even conscious of or aware of. And it's like, because even having the conversations with you, it makes me examine myself. So it's like, I'm sure if you're listening to it, you're like, oh shit.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that's what happens when we have meaningful communication with anybody, is that we start learning and growing. I know and I've listed a bunch of things, and somewhat repetitively, I think, but I would also have to include compulsive shopping, compulsive working out,
cleaning.
We humans are just capable of getting compulsive about anything. And for me, I've mentioned this in an earlier podcast, but for me, it was being a control freak, being compulsively needing control, and being a workaholic. Those were both my go-tos. And I think they are just as disabling, even though I remember getting compliments for being such a hard worker, a good provider, and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I just wasn't having a life, and I really wasn't looking at what was going on in my home, and I wasn't really truly present because I was exhausted all the time. So we can do this with anything. And I don't even want to forget for a minute religiosity, that excessive religious zeal that is all about really a compulsive attraction to religion and all things religious, to the point where you're not living your life. Religion, if it was any good at all, it would come into our lives as a support, an adjunct, something that would help me have a better life. But if it becomes my life, then the wheels have fallen off the bus, which for me was about power and control, and about being a workaholic, and for other people being a shopaholic or a compulsive clean freak.
Well, I think, that's it with porn too. If it becomes your life, that's when.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and your friend, and he's going to be famous by the time we're done talking about him back in Chicago, but I'm assuming he holds a job. So he might justifiably put his hand on his hips. It's not all about porn.
Yeah.
My life isn't about porn. But I would say, yeah, it is, because not every alcoholic drinks throughout the 8 hours they're at work.
Mm-hmm.
They tough it out and then they get home and do their thing. Or even the person who, like my own mother, who would drink only on the weekends.
Yeah.
That's still a person with a drinking problem.
Yeah.
So, you can minimize it all you want, but it's the compulsive nature of it. Is it soothing you? Is it, and are you really unable to engage in intimate relationships?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all very diagnostic. And sadly, all the sex addiction clinics and all of the porn addiction therapists out there, they don't know how to speak this language.
Yeah.
They don't know how to look at this problem in this manner. So that's wasted money.
Yeah.
That's not going to be helpful. But so are those therapists who've deputized themselves as sex police, and they're going to tell you, well, that's just inappropriate.
Yeah. Well, that's what I like about having these conversations, because you're not trying to tell anyone what to do. I'm not either. Hopefully that's getting across to people, but it's like trying to get healthy. Like, we want people to get healthy and try to recognize these patterns in their life that may be holding them back from having a really great relationship that surpasses anything you can imagine, because it's based on those two things, the titillation and intimacy. And intimacy, as you say, is just a ladder. It goes deeper and deeper and deeper. You could just climb up to infinity. It's never ending. And to be able to become aware of this stuff, how we're using these things in our lives, like porn, for instance, and becoming smarter about it and asking ourselves, like, what do we want? And if we want to really build something like a really satisfying intimate relationship, here's kind of what you got to do, the work you got to do. Look at yourself and take the steps to get there.
Yeah. And I would argue, for those who are in those relationships, please stop wasting your life, because you're not doing the porn compulsive person any favors by staying around. You're just being codependent to the point where you're normalizing it and making it okay for them to stay stuck in the same way any of these other compulsive behaviors would continue if people had facilitation for them to continue the behavior without consequences.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, I mean, how much could somebody love you if they were unwilling to go to therapy for any of these issues, including porn? How much could they really love you if their porn mattered more to them than you do?
Mm-hmm. So
that's, if you sit with that question, it's like, damn, what am I doing here? I need to move on.
Yeah, that's something to think about as we wrap up this episode. That's a good way to end it on a thought.
It's just weird that you're laughing about it, making it really weird.
Well, I'm laughing about it now because I see the fault in myself and see that it is kind of, once you get past some of this stuff, it is kind of funny, kind of how you act, how you behave. And I mean, you got to have a sense of humor about it. And I know
you're so right.
People are at different levels. And I just see how, like, you always say that you messed up a lot. I messed up a lot. And it's kind of like, it feels good to get more clear about things. And
I haven't had a single client who has really messed up his life in a way I haven't.
Yeah.
I've got all these parallels. And I think that's true for anybody who really looks at themselves, because we are all far from perfect and we've all failed in many ways. And it would be really weird to not have empathy for the person who's going through their suffering and not be able to look at your own life and see something really similar.
Yeah.
So in terms of managing your sexuality intelligently, porn is not the problem. The lack of intimacy is the problem. And if you take care of the one, the other will be just fine.
Great. And we're going to wrap up there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit steveeting.com and fill out the contact form. And this week's question is as follows. I've been single for over 12 years. probably due to porn. No, I'm joking. So I've been single for over 12 years. My first 2 partners were controlling and emotionally abusive. So now if there's the slightest red flag on a first date, I don't see them again. Am I being too picky and careful? I don't want to be alone forever. What should I be doing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I just want to compliment the person who had the nerve to write that down, because I think it depicts a level of self-awareness that I think is really good. Of course, we don't want to be with anybody who's like that. So you're not being too picky. That's an easy question. We definitely want people who are going to be respectful of our boundaries and who are interested in an abuse-free life. But this is a little bit like going to a therapist to talk about porn. Mm-hmm. And if the therapist is either a delegate from the sex police contingent, or or our therapist finds absolutely no issue whatsoever, leave my office, we can educate our therapist about what it is we want, and we can certainly educate our dates about what it is we're looking for. And I think quitting, even if you see a sign that somebody is controlling or could be abusive, if you see any sign of that, that's a little too early to quit. But it is not too early to bring up the subject and to say, hey, that reminds me of something I forgot to talk to you about. I'm looking for an abuse-free relationship. And what I mean by that is, and then you spell it out. You're looking for no control over each other. You'd like to have a respectful relationship, kind of a live and let live philosophy, where how you each do your own grooming and each have your own friends and each have your own music, that's all okay. That it's really about sharing our lives, not conforming to some sort of sexist script that says, well, if you're the woman, then it's your job to do this, or if you're the man, it's your job to do that. And having that conversation about wanting an abuse-free life and holding it out kind of in an alluring way, a little bit like a really good idea that maybe whose time has come. And yes, if you're dating at the shallow end of the gene pool, you're going to find people who are going to say, yeah, it sounds like bullshit. I'm not interested in that. And I've talked to men and women who've dated and had that experience where they've been shut down and their date was not interested in an abuse-free life. And that's okay. Move on, turn the page, because there's another 4 billion people out there who are available, and you move on. And what you'll find is the more comfortable you get talking about what it is you're looking for, and the earlier you can put that on the table, and the more rigorously you're enforcing that boundary, not running away from, facing your fears, but just facing it head on. So are you saying that because you're trying to control me? Is that what's going on here? And calling people out, having the conversations, you too, just like a client can educate a therapist, I think a girlfriend can educate her boyfriend, and vice versa. And I think that's what we need to do, because there just aren't enough groups out there in the world to have enough therapy for America to say goodbye to abusive behavior. And abuse, frankly, is the norm. In our society, abuse is the norm. And I'm sorry to say that, but even the people who would never physically abuse one another are really open usually to guilt tripping each other or to otherwise trying to control each other's feelings or thoughts and behaviors. So confront it and get comfortable confronting it. And if you need help doing that, go to a therapist. But I wouldn't give up dating, and I wouldn't give up hope. And I would just maybe start disqualifying people and moving on, letting them know, yeah, that's just never going to work for me. Thanks. It's been a pleasure. I'm glad to get to know you, and goodbye.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that question. And thanks, Steve. It's been great chatting with you as always.
Same here, man.
We will catch y'all later.
Bye now.